So we are in Daf Ches and Aleph, right at the beginning of the Daf, 8a, on the first words, and it's a continuation of the machlokas between, or the discussion of what the opinions are of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav or Shmuel in the matter of an alleyway that really was a cul-de-sac. It ended. It basically had three walls, and the back wall ended at either a backyard or a front yard. The front yard being functional, and therefore the people of the front yard have to are essentially a part of whichever alleyway their front yard opens to, and therefore we know the halacha is that anybody that has passageway and an opening to an alleyway must partner with the alleyway in their meal, in the Shabbos meal, in the Eruv, in order to have the valid Eruv, and if not, it would invalidate the Eruv. However, a backyard would not necessarily need that, and this alleyway, this mavui, ended with either a rechava, which is the case of Rabbi Yehuda, a backyard, or in a front yard, in a chutzner. And the Gemara at first thought that the reason that it would be invalid, according to Rav, and the people of the alleyway cannot carry in their alleyway, is because from the perspective of the alleyway, you actually can see straight through to the public domain, to Rishus HaRabim on both sides, because there's a breach at the end into the courtyard, and from the courtyard into the public domain, and it would be prohibited. And the Gemara says, no, the reason is based upon whether or not they join the meal, because now that there's an opening of a front yard, they join the meal. They would have to join a meal because there's now an opening from their front yard to the alleyway, and the question is, did they or did they not join in the Eruv meal? The Gemara now is going to address that. Okay, fine. So you just said that the statement of Rav was based upon whether or not there was a meal, and Rav that said a mavui that was opened up completely to the alleyway, to the courtyard, and from the courtyard to the public domain to Rishus HaRabim, the people that in the mavui are not allowed to carry. And the reason is, you just explained, was based upon whether or not they joined the meal. Okay, great. But in the first interpretation of the Gemara was based upon whether it's considered a alleyway that runs through, even though it goes through their private property. But since the alleyway goes through from one end to the other right now, because there's a breach, the wall fell between the alleyway and the yard, and from the yard to the public domain. And so when you stand in the alleyway, if you look right, you can see the opening of the front of it. And if you look left, you can see the other street through their courtyard. So then it would make no distinction of whether or not they joined the meal or not. Your understanding was that Abaye, the Gemara is addressing Abaye. Your understanding, Abaye, was that either way, it would be an invalid Eruv. Why is that? And the Gemara is now going to explain that halacha, because it's because even though that we have a different interpretation of Rav, but the halacha is still true about a thoroughfare going straight through, and we're trying to understand what the basis of that being valid or invalid would be. And we explained yesterday the concept that if the courtyard if the alleyway's width is 10 amos, and the courtyard's width is 20 amos, and the alleyway opens directly into the courtyard, from the perspective of the alleyway, it looks completely open to the courtyard. But if you're standing in the courtyard, because there are, let's say, 5 amos of wall on either side of the alleyway, it actually looks like a wall with an opening to the alleyway. And therefore, from the perspective of the alleyway, it's completely open, and therefore there needs to be an eruv. From the perspective of the courtyard, it actually is a wall with an opening and a doorway, and since it's 10 amos or less, it counts as a proper door, proper entryway, and it can be an independent space. And this is a very interesting concept and phenomenon, which we're going to see more of today, that it could be that if from your perspective, it looks like it's closed up because there's a wall, and then there's an opening in the wall, that you are an independent space, even though that from the perspective of the alleyway, it's completely open, and for them, it's a joint space. And that's really this discussion. The Gemara begins, and according to what Abaye first thought the meaning of Rav is, and this halacha could be true either way, whether that was the meaning of that statement of Rav or not, but he understands that to be a true halacha, bein she'irvu, bein shelo irvu, regardless of whether or not they joined in the meal with the alleyway, or they did not join in the meal with the alleyway, pligi, nevertheless, Rav would disagree with Rav Yehuda's opinion and would say that it's an invalid, the people in the alleyway cannot carry. Why? What machlokas, what's the basis for their disagreement when they did join the meal? And what's the basis of the disagreement when they did not join the meal? When they did not join in a meal, so that's not the people in the courtyard are not a part of the alleyway. It's on the basis of this question where you can see the wall when you're outside of the alleyway, but when you're in the alleyway, it looks completely open. And there, Rav is going to say that counts as a joint. Since when you stand in the alleyway, the people of the courtyard look completely open to the alleyway. The people in the alleyway then cannot carry without a eruv, without a meal from the people in the courtyard, but the people in the courtyard can carry within the courtyard because for them, the alley is a separate space because they do have walls that are seen from their perspective. The
people can carry. They can carry if they made an eruv chatzerus. They do a
carry within their own courtyard, even if they didn't join the mavui, didn't join the alleyway. They did make an eruv within their courtyard. They can carry in their courtyard, but they cannot carry into the alleyway, and the alleyway cannot carry within itself either. And what happened if they did join the meal? What's the basis of the machlokas? Kamifulagi b'd Rabbi Yosef. The machlokas is in regards to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. The Amar Rabbi Yosef said, "L'shanu ela shekollel le'emtza rechava." This is only true if it ended in the middle of the courtyard or the backyard. Really, rechava is the backyard, and this that it says that you can carry in the courtyard. You can carry in the alleyway, even though that it ended in a backyard, which had a wall, but the wall was breached. And then from there it goes on, and you can enter from that backyard into the street. Nevertheless, you can carry in the alleyway because it looks like a separate space. This is only going to be true if the alley ends in the middle of the backyard. So from the backyard perspective, you're going to see both on both sides of the alleyway a wall. Therefore, it looks like the alleyway actually ends at the backyard. However, if the side of the alleyway is flush with the back of the backyard, and therefore it continues straight, and there's a straight wall along the entire alleyway and the backyard wall, so then it looks like it's one continuous space, and then you couldn't carry, even if you made an error, you couldn't carry on account of that. It looks like this backyard is open, this alleyway is open straight through to the other street. But if the alleyway ends along the back wall of the backyard, usher, you're not allowed to carry, because then it looks like the alleyway goes all the way to the next, from the public domain all the way to the next public domain. Amar Rabba, and Rabba further said, and even this, that we said, that the alleyway ends in the middle of the backyard. So as soon as you come to the end of the alleyway to the backyard, both on the right side of it and on the left side of it, you're going to see a wall of the backyard. So it's a T junction, if you would, at the end of the alleyway into the backyard. And then it'll be okay. But still, it would have to be that if you're looking straight ahead, you're going to see a wall of the backyard alongside the Rishus Harabim, the public domain. Even though that somewhere else along that wall, there's a breach that opens up to the public domain, but it's not directly across the alleyway. Meaning, if you stand in the alleyway and you look to the opening of the alleyway, you'll see a Rishus Harabim public domain. But if you look back to where the back wall used to be and is now breached into the backyard, you would not see directly straight into the public domain. Rather, you'd see a wall, and off to the side is where that opening to the public domain is. So then the alleyway does not open straight into the public domain. But if it's directly across, then it would be prohibited. And the Gemara is going to talk about that later again. Amar Misharshe. So Misharshe said, this that we said, that if it's not directly across, meaning that from the alleyway you could not see into the public domain on the back side of the alleyway through the courtyard or through the backyard, because there's the opening is off to the side. But this is only true if another caveat. It's only true if this is a backyard of multiple homes. But if this is a single person's backyard, well, we have a problem. Maybe he's going to make an addition to his house and turn that into a front yard by adding a room and an opening to that courtyard. And what's going to end up happening is that the alleyway wall can end up being flush with the backyard because he's extended the house. And therefore it would be prohibited because it looks like the alleyway it goes straight through to the other end, and therefore since it's a private person's property, not multiple people's property, and therefore he doesn't have to get permission from anybody to extend. And if he can extend on his own, we're afraid he's going to change the dimensions, and by changing the dimensions, changing the dynamic of that backyard, and the halacha would change. And since it's a private property, no one will know that change was made and continue carrying, even though that the halacha now changed because the alleyway wall continues directly straight into the yard. And so even now, in concern of what it may change, it's prohibited to carry now. How do I know that this is true, that we're concerned that private citizens, private property, somebody will change the current halachic status, and therefore you're not allowed to rely on it. And this is the concept of that if there's a fence, a wall of some sort that's a private property that can come down at any point, you can't rely on it just like that. Niyama Ravin, in the name of Rabbi Tzvi. The story with an alleyway that didn't have proper walls. However, the walls that it was relying upon were there. On the one side, it had a garbage heap that was more than 10 tefachim, so it counted as a wall. On the other side, it had a body of water, and that body of water was the seabed that the the ground beneath that water was steep enough that it dropped 10 tefachim within 4 amos, and that counts as a halachic wall. Again, that's 4 amos and about 6 feet. It dropped 10 tefachim, so let's say about just shy of 3 feet. So it dropped 3 feet in within 6 feet. It's less than 3 feet, so it's less than that. It's approximately a 25-degree angle. And so if it dropped off like that, that would count as a wall. So it actually had on either side of this alleyway, there was a halachic wall. On the one side, it was the seabed, the water. On the other side, it was this ashpa, this trash heap. And they came before Rebbe and said, look, does this count as proper walls to the alleyway, and you're allowed to carry in there? So you didn't say it's permissible, you didn't say it's prohibited. You didn't want to say it's prohibited, because after all, right now it has proper halachic walls. It has boundaries. And but he didn't say that it's permissible, because since these are private property, it was a private person's trash. Maybe he's going to remove that heap, or alternatively on the seabed. Maybe there'll be wash up along the side, and that slope would flatten out, and then it would not count as a wall, and nobody would know. The Gemara says, is that really a concern whether trash heap will be taken away? We're not concerned about that. As we see the Mishnah later, that if there's a trash heap in the public domain, 10 tefachim tall, if there's overlooking that, there's a window from a house that's overlooking it. You can throw something from the private domain, your house, into the trash heap, because that trash heap is also private domain. So the distinction must be that that's a public domain, a garbage heap. That trash heap is going to remain there because that's its place. That is the public trash heap, and so it's likely to stay there. A private trash heap, you can move it at any point, and so you can't rely on that. So too over here, if the backyard that we're relying on, based on it being recessed from the end of the alleyway, and therefore it doesn't look like the alleyway continues along the wall of the house, because it turns into it's a sort of like a T-junction. Therefore, it counts as a separate space. But if it's a private property, he may end up bringing his wall flush along that alleyway wall, and then the alleyway is going to continue all the way to the other public domain. Therefore, so too here, if it's a private property, we cannot rely on it. If it's public property, meaning there are masses, more than there are multiple people living in that backyard. So therefore, we're not concerned that one person alone will come and change the backyard, and you're allowed to rely on it. So Rebbe would not respond and would not permit or prohibit carrying in this alleyway. What did the Rabbanan say to that? So one brisa says that the Chachamim disagreed and said, no, for sure you cannot carry in this alleyway that is relying upon a garbage heap on one side and a seabed on the other. Rav Nachman said that is indeed the halacha. Those that say there are those that say that the Chachamim permitted. And then Rav Nachman said the halacha is not that way. By the way, that this is not so clear in halacha, but our halacha definitely follows more of the opinion that it is permissible to carry in such a private domain, because right now it is enclosed with a ashba, with a trash, and there's a seabed. Exactly when and how that would apply, there are many halachic caveats, but in much of Europe, they rely on the fact that there are islands and that the water is 10 tefachim below the road, the street, and the street drops off directly to the river, and that counts as a wall. Amsterdam, Rotterdam, much of Europe relies on Eruvin in such a way where the seabed is off at the side, or not a sea, the river side. But usually those are actually not sloped, but it's actually a wall that was built to protect and support the side, and therefore that there's less of a concern that the slope will change. That's true in sort of a beach, but in where it's a complete straight drop off, it's less of a concern. In any case, we're not doing halacha. The laws of Eruvin are very complex, but just to get a concept of where this goes. Meremar pasik le surah ba'uzli. Meremar ruled, Meremar put up a barrier at the end before the water, using some sort of reed mat. He put them up as a border and did not want to rely on the water on the seabed. Because maybe that slope will change as the water recedes and comes back and brings more dirt, and you won't have a halachic wall anymore. So he didn't rely on that, and he put up a fence. Rav Chisda, sorry, I skipped the line. There was a L-shaped alleyway in Surah, which we saw yesterday, that according to Shmuel, an L-shaped alleyway really is a three-walled single straight line alleyway, and another one, it's two separate alleyways that simply join, but each one has three walls of its own with a less than 10 amma breach on one wall, and that's okay because according to Shmuel, you can have an opening of up to 10 ammas. So as long as the turn to the other alleyway is less than 10 amos, each one is an independent alleyway that has its own three walls and doesn't need any demarcation at the bend or really at the other side. So in Surah, they had such an L-shaped alleyway. Korach Budya, and they took a rolled up mat and placed it at one of the corners. At the point where the alleyway turns. So Rav Chisda said that is a useless post over there. To put that there as a vertical post, it's useless because it doesn't work according to Rav and it doesn't work according to Shmuel. According to Rav, that says that since it bends, it is completely open, from one end to the other. So then you don't need something specifically at the corner, and even if you do, you don't. What you mainly need is at the two main openings of the public domain. Surah Pesach, and you need it to be a complete doorway. L'Shmuel, and according to Shmuel, that says that each part of that L is a separate alleyway that's enclosed within three walls and simply has an opening to the side. You would still require a proper lechi, a vertical post. But this is not a vertical post because it's a rolled up mat. Yes, it's standing right now, but a gust of wind comes and it can blow it over. So it's nothing. However, if he stuck a nail in it and connected it to the wall, that would count as a valid vertical post, even though that the wind can unravel it. But since it's stationary, at least one part along the wall, that'll work. And this is indeed the halach of a vertical post. The vertical posts don't need very much density. We'll see more about that, but it doesn't have to be as opposed to the horizontal cross beam above the korah that has, we'll see the halachas it has to be, what size, how strong. The vertical posts are not so. Gufa. So we're going to go back to the halacha of an alleyway that opens into a broader space, whereas from the alleyway it looks completely open, but from that broader space it looks like there's a wall on either side and an opening to the alleyway. Gufa Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Rabbi Yirmiyah Barabba Amar Rav in the name of Rav. You have an alleyway that opens up, it's completely open from the alleyway's perspective, completely open into the courtyard. And directly across that, it's also open to the public domain. The courtyard nevertheless is allowed to be carried within, but you're not allowed to carry in the alleyway. And we had explained that the basis of this is because they didn't join the meal. But as far as the concept of Abaye's interpretation would have been, we said at the beginning of today's daf, that the reason, regardless of whether they join the meal or not, and you would not allowed to be carrying within the alleyway, because from the alleyway's perspective, it looks like it's completely open to the public domain. Even though the people in the courtyard can carry, because for them there are four walls. There's the two walls on either side that open to the houses, and then even on the side of the breach to the public domain and the breach to the alleyway, there is still a wall on either side of those openings. So there are four walls simply with an opening to an alleyway and an opening to a public domain, and so there you're allowed to carry. Amalei Rabbi Bar Ula Rav Beiva Bar Abaye. So Rabbi Bar Ula said to Beiva Bar Abaye, Rebbe, my teacher, isn't this a Mishnah that we know already? And this is a Mishnah we'll see later. We'll see tomorrow's daf and later in the Masechta. Chatzar Katana Shanifritza, a small alleyway, Shanifritza L'Gadol, that opens up into a small courtyard that opens up into a larger courtyard. So let's say courtyard A is 20 by 20, and that opens up on the one side completely into a courtyard that is 30 wide. So from the perspective of the larger courtyard, you see walls leading up to the smaller courtyard. But in the smaller courtyard, it looks completely open. So Gedolim Materis. So the larger courtyard is allowed to carry because that's an independent space, if they made an eruv amongst themselves. Ukatana, and the smaller courtyard, Asura may not carry unless they made an eruv with the larger one as well, because for them, they're completely open to the larger space. The larger space actually has some barriers and therefore is going to be smaller to the, going to be distinct from the smaller one. It's just an opening to the larger one. But Amalei Imahasam says no. I would not have known this halacha of Rav from the halacha of the Mishnah. And we needed both teachings because Hava Amina, I may have thought, Mishnah is talking about a case where it's a courtyard and a courtyard. Well, there's no it's not a thoroughfare. There's no right from one courtyard to just trespass through the other courtyard. So perhaps that's why the larger courtyard is going to remain an independent space. It remains an independent space because from its perspective, you can see walls, and it's open to another courtyard, which wouldn't just trespass. But if it's open to an alleyway, where an alleyway the people can walk and just it's meant to walk through, and from the alleyway's perspective, it looks like it's completely open to the courtyard, and from the courtyard to the public domain. So it looks like it's a total thoroughfare, and people may walk through there. So perhaps even the alleyway cannot carry, even the back, that courtyard cannot carry because the alleyway essentially runs directly through it. He says, even that we've learned. If you have a private property courtyard and people trespass there, there's a shortcut that people use through that courtyard. In regards to Tuma, that counts as a public domain. We've seen this several times in Shabbos and in Brachas already. The concept of Tuma, of whenever there's a doubt in halacha, there are various halachas. Generally, we say a doubt in a oraisa, in a Torah level concept, you have to be strict. In a rabbinic halacha, you can be lenient. And when it comes to Tuma, if there's a doubt, it depends whether it's in private domain or public domain, and this is based on the learning it from Sota. We've seen this before. We don't have to go into that comparison, but the halacha is that whenever you find a concept of Tuma, if there are two or more people that are there or have a right to be there, that constitutes a public domain, and we're lenient in regards to Tuma. If it is in a private domain, then we are strict in regards to Tuma. Since this courtyard, even though that it's a private space, but since it is a shortcut for people from outside the courtyard do walk through there, it constitutes a public domain in regards to Tuma, and when you have a doubt, you can be lenient. However, in regards to Shabbos, it's going to still remain a private property, even though people can walk through because of the they use it as a shortcut. Nevertheless, it is an enclosed space and it's a private property, and therefore it counts as a chutzer, a private property, and you're allowed to carry within there. And if all the neighbors that live in that courtyard made an eruv, they can carry from the house in and out. So you see that even though that it's a space that people walk through, nevertheless it counts as a private domain. So too over here in our alleyway, even though that from the perspective of the alleyway it looks like it goes straight through the public domain, but the courtyard, from the perspective of the courtyard, it is a private domain, and it has four walls. Simply it has openings on either side, but it has four walls. It should count as its own domain. So Gemara says, I may have thought that halacha of the trespassers, of the shortcut through an alleyway, through the courtyard, that's only true if it's not directly across one another, where the entry into the courtyard, and the shortcut exit are not directly across each other. However, in our alleyway, and now we turn to Chesamad Beis 8b, but in our alleyway, it's directly across. Perhaps it would not be valid, and therefore it would count as a public thoroughfare, and you're not allowed to. And the courtyard does not count as its private, independent space. That's why we needed Rav to tell us that it would count as its private space. Well, what about Rabbi, who said that actually, if it does open directly across, it is prohibited? The Rav, so how would we? How are we going to explain that Rav needed to teach us this halacha? That must be that Rav's halacha is talking about where actually the alleyway enters the courtyard, but the opening to the court to the street from that courtyard is not directly across it; it's somewhere off to the side. So Tarti Lovely. So why do I need a Mishnah and Rav's teaching? Because I may have thought it's only going to count as a private domain, in as much as if you carry from the public domain into there, you've transgressed the Torah prohibition. But to carry within that courtyard, perhaps you're not allowed to. That's what Rav tells you. No, actually, the people of that courtyard are allowed to carry, because to them, from their perspective, there's a four-wall enclosure with openings to the public domain and an opening to an alleyway, but it's still, since it doesn't directly open from one to the other, according to this opinion, it would count as a private independent space, and you're allowed to carry within that space. Itmar. So it is said, Mava asa kanadal. If you have a centipede-like alleyway, meaning essentially there's a main alleyway and small alleys coming off of them, multiple on either side. So it looks like a body with multiple legs coming off. Each one of these open up to the alley, to a public domain. So it's surrounded on four sides by a public domain, and you have a main alleyway, a main not Torah level public domain, and streets coming off on either side. Sort of grid-like, but one spine and multiple legs coming off. Abaye in this first version is going to say only the opening of on one side of the main the spine of this alleyway, of these alleyways. Only the spine needs a door frame. But the rest of them are all going to only need either a vertical post or a horizontal post at its opening from the public domain, and that would be enough to enclose it. Amalei Rava said, "Kaman Kashmuel." That's according to Shmuel, who said in an L-shaped alleyway that you only need something at the openings. You don't need something because each one counts as its own separate mavel. Well, if that's the case, if that's the case, why do I need anywhere a door frame? Shmuel doesn't require a door frame at any of them. Every single one of the openings would suffice to just have either a vertical or horizontal post. And besides, what about the U shape, the ches shape alleyway that was in the Hardov? And there, even though it's the city of Shmuel, they were strict to accept upon them the opinion of Rav that it does need something at the bends. So therefore Rava said, every single one of the openings to the public domain requires a door frame. But in the joint between the spine, the main thoroughfare, and all the offshoots from there, there you only need a vertical or horizontal post. Amar Rav Kahana. Three Rav Kahanas said in the name of each other. Mishmeder Rav Kahana Rabbi, the Rav. In the name of Rav Kahana, the teacher of Rav. Rav Kahana Bar Malkiyo, Hainu Rav Kahana Rabbi the Rav. And some say that's the same person. You have an alleyway. So back to our Mishnah, it's a three-walled alleyway. However, so our scenario was the opening was on west side. You have a north, a east, and south wall, and an opening on the west side. However, the south wall ended short of the north wall. So you enter the alleyway on the west side, on your left, which is the north wall. You're going to have a 20 amma wall, but on the south side you only have a 15 amma wall. So it doesn't end and doesn't line up completely with it. Whether there was something that didn't allow it to be there, or it wasn't complete yet, whatever the scenario is, it doesn't end equally. So if the south side in our scenario, which is shorter and it doesn't end flush with the north side, is 4 amos or less from that end, so then the crossbeam above, it would be sufficient to just be on an angle from the front of one to the end of the other. And if you look at Rashi, you can see the diagram for that. And that would be okay. Arba amos, however, if the one wall is more than that, it's 4 amos or more from the opening. So then you have to square up the crossbeam from that end of the shorter wall, and you'll essentially lose out that excess that the long wall has. Rav Amar, however, Rava says no, that's not true. You always have to square it up, regardless of whether it's just a little bit shorter or a lot shorter. You always have to just make the cross beam square with the end of the short wall. And he says, and I'll explain my opinion, I'll explain their opinion. I'll explain my opinion. What's the basis for the cross beam? To remind you, this is the end of the alleyway. When it's on an angle, when it's not straight across, it's on an angle, people don't notice it. And I'll tell you their explanation. They don't see the crossbeam as a reminder, as a hecker, this is the end of the alleyway, but rather, as we saw right at the beginning of the Masechta, that there's an opinion that says that the crossbeam serves as a doorway. And therefore, when it's on an angle, you could still have a doorway on an angle. And since this is an opinion of many Rav Kahanas, said in the name of another Rav Kahana, in the name of another Rav Kahana, I'll tell you something also, because my name is also Rav Kahana. It has to be that that we said, that you can put it across the alleyway on an angle. That's only true if the total length of that crossbeam is going to be 10 amos or less in the opening. Now, well, it's going to be larger because it has to sit on the walls, but the opening in that angle is going to be 10 amos or less. But if it's larger than 10 amos, that doesn't count as a proper opening. It's too big. So everybody will agree you can only put it square with the short wall. In Boilus, the Gemara asks a question. In general, when we have this cross beam at the opening of an alleyway, are you allowed to carry beneath that beam or not? And we saw this question really on the first daf already. Rav Chia and Rabbi Yochanan, contemporary students of Rebbe, they said you're allowed to carry beneath that cross beam. Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon ben Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. However, they say you're not allowed to carry beneath this cross beam. We're out of time. Tomorrow we'll go into this machlokas of whether you can carry beneath the cross beam at the entrance of an alleyway.